Howdy, welcome to Realize Homestead. I'm Levi and I'll be your tour guide for today. So I just wanted to take the opportunity now in the middle of the season here to kind of like do a walking tour of the grounds and show you all the stuff that we got going on here. But just a little background context first. So this 10-acre piece of property that I'm on now was originally part of my great-grandparents' 30-acre farm, but it hasn't been actively farmed in more than 30 years. So in my entire lifetime, I've never seen it as an active farm. And when I inherited this piece of property from my parents about 10 years ago, there was absolutely no infrastructure on it at all. No buildings, no water source or power or anything. Basically just a bunch of overgrown Christmas trees that you can see behind me now that my grandpa planted. And I'm very grateful for. Actually, I'm extremely grateful in general for this property, and I fully recognize that it's a huge privilege to be gifted a piece of property like this. Not only that, but also this land is the unceded territory of the native Anishinaabe people. And while I don't always know exactly what that means, in being here, I think it's important to try to find the right relationship with the local tribes and with the land itself. And so that's something I'm striving to do while I'm here as well. All right, so what's this all about? What am I up to here? It's a little hard to explain, and I do go way more in depth into the why in my 10-year update video that I posted on my YouTube channel this spring. So I recommend checking that out. But in a nutshell, this evolved from a growing understanding of the global industrial systems that we're all dependent on for our basic needs, agriculture, energy, transportation, the economy, the global economy, and so on. And realizing how destructive those systems are to the environment and how exploitative they are to marginalized people. And not only that, but that those systems are unsustainable and that we're already starting to see them becoming less reliable. And I expect that to continue as our global consumption hits biological and geological resource limits. So I think we not only have an ethical imperative, but also a practical imperative to try to wean ourselves from the teat of this global death machine. And don't get me wrong, I still suckle from that teat almost every day. But, we're all kind of in Oil Addicts Anonymous here. But from my vantage point, I think that we need to be experimenting with and booting up alternative systems to provide for our basic needs like food, shelter, energy, medicine, and so on, that are local, human scale, equitable, and ecologically responsible. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do here at Realize Homestead in my own haphazard way. And while I've learned a ton and studied, disciplines like permaculture and regenerative agriculture and transition towns and so on, I definitely don't want to come off as some kind of expert. I'm more of a tinkerer myself. Most of my projects are pretty half-assed. Definitely not polished for Instagram. A lot of it's actually kind of messy and wild, but then again, so is nature. So with that, let's go for a little walk. We're now entering my site along the main driveway from the west edge. And you can see over here some trees that we planted in tree tubes. And these are the big canopy species like walnuts, chestnuts, black locust, white oaks. And while they take years to get established, eventually they'll produce hundreds of pounds of high-calorie nuts every year with almost no maintenance. That can be used for personal consumption or for feeding livestock like pigs. Plus, these big trees on the perimeter act as a windbreak, helping to shelter the site. Now, if you've ever tried gardening yourself, you probably noticed that after all the ingredients you had to buy and the time you invested, it would have been way easier and cheaper just to buy some veggies at the store. This is why I try to depend less on commoditized gardening products and instead be resourceful and thrifty with both my money and my time, since people experiencing real scarcity in their lives are likely short on both. Actually, all of us involved in this project have full-time jobs, and this is something we do on the side. So we've naturally had to figure out the strategies that produce the greatest yield for the least input of time and money. But I think this also makes our subsistence approach accessible to more people, compared to high-input, large-scale conventional farming or the overly manicured performance gardening, what I call the Martha Stewart approach. As we head back down the driveway now, off to the north here is a bulk resource collection and drop-off zone for things like cardboard to create new garden beds through sheet mulching, some firewood that's drying, pallets and old concrete chunks as free building materials, wood chips and leaves for free mulch, and we sometimes create our own charcoal when burning brush piles. And when it's inoculated with soil microbes, this charcoal becomes biochar, a powerful and long-lasting soil building ingredient. All right, let's continue our jaunt down the driveway towards the center of the site. Here's an apple tree my grandma planted. I like to collect the apples that are full of bugs and worms and feed them to my pigs, who are the ultimate food waste recyclers. And a blackberry patch, also a nice legacy inheritance from my ancestors. By the way, you probably keep hearing me say we a lot. There's just a huge group of friends and family and mentors who helped make this whole thing possible. So here's our hoop house and my garden. Outside the perimeter fence of the garden is planted with potatoes, since deer and rabbits don't bother with them. Potatoes are a great staple crop. They're really easy to grow and easy to store through the winter without refrigeration. My friend and teacher Penny manages the hoop house and most of the veggie gardens here. She gets the veggie seedlings and lettuces started in here in the spring, and now in the heat of the summer switches to the heat-loving crops like tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and so on. Okay, we can check out my garden. It kind of feels vulnerable showing you my garden since I'm kind of an amateur gardener compared to Penny and others, but I guess I'll show you anyways because it makes me happy. So I use a type of no-till approach called deep mulch gardening, and you'll notice there's almost no soil exposed. This mimics how the forest floor remains covered with leaves and other material, which helps to cycle nutrients and hold in moisture. So this is one of the many strategies that helps to produce more food with less work and less input of watering and fertilizer. Oh, nice! My first ripe tomato of the season. You can also see some cabbages here, which are a great storage crop for the winter. Broccoli. Ooh, this one's ready to eat. And lots of kale here too, for the daily dose of vitamins and minerals to keep me healthy. Now this is one of my favorite plants. It's called sea kale. And the leaves are edible and very nutritious, just like regular kale. But the big difference is that it's a perennial instead of an annual. And that means that you just plant it once and it keeps coming back every year. Unlike conventional kale that needs to be replanted from seed every year. You can see it's really thick and meaty too. So by focusing more on perennial species, it also helps to reduce the time and inputs and labor needed to grow some high quality foods. It can just be part of your landscaping. I got my climber beans going, another good staple crop that's high calorie and easy to preserve. So while these strawberries were getting established as a ground cover, strawberries, another great perennial crop, I seeded in a cover crop, or it's kind of like a placeholder crop, of some fodder radishes, which are very similar to daikon radishes, if you know what those are. Now I could actually eat this radish and the whole green part as well. But this time I've got some little piggy friends that I think will enjoy these. Let's go visit them. So allow me to introduce you to Penelope, Rose, and Ron. And I'm able to raise them almost completely without purchased food through a combination of what they forage from the pasture, combined with food scraps from the local grocery store, and the surplus from the garden, like these radishes. Scratches? Nope. You guys are gonna eat my arm, aren't you? And here's those buggy apples. Now, I could eat these apples or turn them into apple cider, but personally, I think turning them into bacon is a pretty sweet move. In colder climates, it was traditionally quite challenging to get enough fat in your diet during the winters. And fat's a major source of energy to keep you warm, and it helps absorb vitamins, and it's essential for the brain and mental health. So pigs are basically like the garbage disposal of the home, and their lard provides that essential fat source during the winter. And by moving them often in a practice called mob grazing, they're actually having a beneficial effect on the health of the pasture. When managed properly, the plants feed the pigs, and the pigs feed the plants in a positive feedback loop. Plus, they're endlessly entertaining to watch. Here's the first of two tiny homes on site, and this one is a converted hunting cabin. The smaller size means it takes less firewood to heat it and generally uses less water and electricity too. I can power my tiny home during the spring, summer, and fall with just these two 200-watt solar panels and a 1500 watt-hour battery. Actually, a person living in a tiny home like this uses about 50% to 80% less resources per capita compared to the US average. We don't just grow veggies here. We also grow flowers for beauty and medicines for healing. Back around behind the tiny home is what I affectionately call the junkyard. It's another resource collection zone, but generally for smaller, more processed materials like lumber, pipes and hoses, bricks, blocks, barrels, fencing, pots, and more. I probably pull stuff out of here to use at least a few times a week. So recycling and repurposing are great ways to cut costs, and you wouldn't believe what people give away for free. Okay, now we're heading towards the center of the site. And here's my little playground. It's no Tempest freerunning academy, but it's fun for me. This is the largest garden on site, aptly named the production garden. You can see Penny is growing a nice big bed of garlic here that's about ready to be harvested. I've got a few gooseberry bushes that are just insanely loaded with fruit right now. A relative of the gooseberry is the currant. This is a clove currant, also very productive as you can see. Here's another favorite, the Egyptian walking onion. It's a perennial onion that comes back every year. You can eat the green stalk like a chive, but also the root bulb is like a shallot. They slowly spread, creating these clusters. And also, when the stalk bends down, it plants another one nearby, which it does over and over again, hence the term walking onion. Here's another hit, perennial arugula. Why plant arugula every year when you can just have it growing as a weed in your garden? Spicy.
That's a spicy meatball!
Ooh, check out the pollinators on this leek blossom. That's cool. Oregano is another great plant for pollinators. And it's a perennial herb that's adapted to Mediterranean-like habitats. So it actually does pretty well out in the really sandy, dry pasture here beneath the fruit and nut trees. Speaking of the pasture trees, I also have my tree nursery here in the production garden. Some I buy as bare root plants, others I start from seed or propagate through cuttings. Some chestnut seedlings, I've got clove currant cuttings. I've had much better survival rate by babying them here in the nursery for a year before planting them out into the pasture. I also give a lot of these plants away to friends to start their own food forests. So this acts as a kind of mother colony of awesome plants. Here's a couple Asian pears. Look, it's already got fruit on it. These are sand cherry, which are a native shrub with beautiful white blossoms, English walnut, and many more. This plant is Good King Henry, which you can think of as a perennial spinach. While it's pretty bitter when raw, it cooks up well. We already made lots of pesto with it this year. So this time, I'm gonna harvest some for the chickens. All right, so what is that now? So now we got this landscape of all these awesome crops that just come back every year all by themselves with almost no inputs. We got all the nut trees. We got all the berries like strawberries and gooseberries. We got the perennial sea kale. We got the perennial onions. We got the perennial arugula. We got the perennial spinach. So basically the idea here is that we're creating a kind of self-sustaining ecosystem modeled off of how nature works. And not only is it growing all these awesome crops and food, but it's also providing a whole host of other ecosystem services, like providing wildlife habitat, providing food for pollinators, and helping to build soil and hold in moisture and sequester carbon in the soil. It turns out this type of ecosystem management was practiced by many native cultures all across the Americas before the arrival of European settlers. Much of this knowledge has been lost due to cultural genocide. So it's important that as we propagate these plants, we're also propagating this knowledge and practice from the few seeds of the ancient traditions that still exist today. This is comfrey, which is highly nutritious for livestock, although it's not common people food. But it's also a great mulch plant. You can see how it's mulched and smothered all the other grass that's around it.
So I like planting it at the base of my fruit trees and bushes so I don't have to keep dumping wood chips or leaves around the trees every year for mulch. Instead, I can just plant a plant that automatically mulches the trees and shrubs by itself, which just brings us back to this overall theme of mimicking the way that natural ecosystems function to reduce the need for inputs of time and money. Here are some young guinea fowl in this brooder coop. Guineas are sort of like a more wild version of a chicken. A weed that often appears on compost piles like this one is lamb's quarter. It's really common on farms. But I love it because it's another spinach alternative that's actually pretty tasty. And it's more great free animal feed. Here, let's see what the guineas think. I think they like it. Now look at this. How'd you guys get out? Just kidding. They kept escaping the pen. So now I just let them be the free rangers. Normally, not being protected by the electric fence, they would just get picked off by predators. But so far, we haven't lost any this year. I'm guessing it's because there are 3 dogs living here on site this year. It's great too because the guineas are known to be great at eating ticks, which in turn helps keep the dogs healthy and tick-free. So we're not just finding beneficial relationships between plants, but also between animals. Because animals are part of a whole healthy functioning ecosystem as well. Okay, let's feed the laying hens the greens we picked. I don't think they're all that hungry because we just moved them to this new location on the pasture, so they probably gorged themselves on bugs and grass today. Okay, I've got some grocery store food waste to feed the egg layers too. As omnivores, chickens are excellent recyclers of almost any kind of organic waste. Even if I just dumped a leaf pile in here, they'd dig through it and find all the worms and slugs and things in it they could eat. Like the pigs, these chickens receive very little purchase feed, and yet they still produce around 8 to 10 eggs per day for us. What's this? One of you chickens is an egg eater.
Naughty, naughty.
One of the chores when using food waste is sorting out all the contaminants. So if you're working somewhere that separates their food scraps, please don't throw trash in with the food scraps. Just think of the pigs and chickens. Thank you. My buddy Garen is raising some ducks here this year too. They're pretty fun to watch.
It's a duck ruckus. It's funny, they like scare themselves.
I know.
You'll notice how the bird pens are in between rows of trees in tree tubes. This is a type of agroforestry practice called silvopasture, where trees and shrubs are combined with animal pasture for mutually beneficial impacts. This is the mid-canopy layer that includes plums, apricots, mulberries, apples, pears, and hazelnuts, just to name a few. The trees help to provide shade for the animals, reducing their heat stress in the summer. And of course, the animals will get to eat all the surplus fruits and nuts that fall to the ground. Any extra brush we trim from these forests can be turned into biochar for our gardens. And eventually, we can even thin the trees for firewood. So while they take years to get established, these pasture trees will be the real workhorses of productivity, helping us to close the loops in the long run. In the beginning, I talked about booting up alternative systems to provide for our needs, in order to wean ourselves off the destructive and ultimately unsustainable and unreliable global industrial systems. Hopefully now you can start to get an idea of how that might look in practice. But beyond that, I also hope this can help you envision what kinds of better worlds are possible. I'm not trying to suggest that everyone should be raising pigs or living in tiny homes. These are just the solutions that I found to work for me in my unique context here. I think part of our problem is seeking global solutions that are blind to the great ecological and cultural diversity of the world. So, my vision for the future includes a rich mosaic of different sovereign land-based cultures, unique to their context, but hopefully all able to cooperate towards some shared goals too.
Okay, well that's about it. Thanks for taking the time to go on a little tour with me today. Hopefully you had some fun and maybe you learned a little something. I guess I'd like to end this with a quote from one of the founders of permaculture, Bill Mollison. The greatest change we need to make is from consumption to production. even if only on a small scale in our own gardens. If only 10% of us do this, there'll be enough for everyone. Hence the futility of revolutionaries who have no gardens, who depend on the very systems that they attack, and who produce words and bullets instead of food and shelter.